Hello and welcome. As feminism evolved at the start of the 1990s, she found herself at the forefront of a new wave of thinking that questioned traditional views on women's rights. She also challenged the beauty culture that dominated the way that most women regarded themselves. This week on One on One, meet writer and activist Naomi Wolf. From a young age, this San Francisco-born writer was questioning the common wisdom when it came to feminism and social activism. Naomi Wolf was influenced heavily by her family, particularly her liberal Jewish parents, who were both respected academics and writers, living in an area that was considered the center of the social and sexual revolutions of the 1960s and early 70s. Her mother, Deborah Goldman, influenced Naomi and her siblings as an anthropologist and as an author, writing about the lesbian community. Wolf proved her own academic skills, studying at Yale University and then getting a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford, where the roots of her first best-selling book, The Beauty Myth, began, a publication that in 1991 quickly propelled the young activist into the global limelight. Moving more into social activism and traveling the world, Wolf went on to author pieces on the erosion of civil rights and abuse of power, with books such as Give Me Liberty and The End of America, which was adapted for the big screen. In 2005, Naomi Wolf came full circle with a book called The Treehouse, which looks back at life lessons learned from her father, Leonard, and the rest of her large, closely knit family. Naomi, real pleasure to talk with you.
It's so great to talk to you again, Reese.
And we'll get for our viewers, give us a definition of liberal feminist, which is how you generally describe yourself.
Well, actually, I describe myself as a feminist very happily, but I don't like the term liberal as a label. I like to think of myself as an independent. But feminist, to me, is basically as simple as the idea that everyone should have the opportunity to contribute and develop his or her gifts without gender being used as a barrier. I don't see feminism as a women's issue anymore. I don't see women's issues as women's issues anymore. My audiences these days are as many men as women.
So it's human rights, really.
Yeah, totally, and it's so interconnected. I mean, so many of my audience members are dads who want to know how to raise their girls to be strong and confident and want equal opportunity for their girls. And, plenty of parents I meet also want their sons to grow up respecting women and, to form the kinds of intimate bonds that you really only have when you have basic equality.
It's interesting, of course, there's a lot of focus on the Muslim world now. I mean, there was the post-9/11 fear of Islam, but also look at the culture itself. And as someone who's traveled, how do you regard the way certainly people in America see the Muslim world and some of the cultural differences, the way women are in some Muslim countries, for example?
Right. I mean, that's a huge question you've asked, Reese, and it's a very important one. What troubles me a lot is that there is a vast amount of ignorance about Islam and about the Muslim world in America on the part of ordinary Americans. Not malicious ignorance, just cluelessness. But that is being acted on deliberately, or has been for the last 8 years, by a very evil administration that used demagoguery and whipped up hatred and whipped up racism against Muslims, and I would say horrific kind of religious hatred against Islam in order to advance its own very sinister political agenda. And I would say not only against Islam, but against its own citizens in the United States, because I think anti-Muslim feeling was used as a pretext for cracking down on civil liberties at home, in addition to a global agenda. But one reason this is so close to my heart, and one reason I reach out as much as I can for Muslim-U.S. dialogue at the grassroots level, is that I had some very profound experiences growing up that gave me some insight that I think most Americans aren't lucky enough to have, and I wish they were privileged as I was. One of them was that when I was 15, I was sent to Israel. I'm Jewish, and it's quite a rite of passage. You get kind of sent over to Israel for a summer to basically get indoctrinated. I didn't realize that at the time, of course, but you really learn this whole kind of propaganda about the founding of Israel and our right to the land, and you learn some very positive things too about being Jewish. And there's some good things about it, but you definitely learn kind of an official narrative about that whole region that makes it very, very hard, if not impossible, to have dialogue that makes any sense at all with Palestinians or with anyone in the Muslim world, because it's a kind of either or. There's no gray area. And then when I was 20, I got a grant to travel to the occupied territories and to Lebanon in order to learn what their story was, especially how children were being taught the same version of events. And what I saw was that there was this mirror image, that the kids in the occupied territories and in Lebanon were being taught an equally black and white narrative in which the Jews were the bloodthirsty monsters, just like we'd been taught that, the Muslims are less than equal, and that there was this intensive propagandizing of both sets of children and adolescents, making it totally impossible to even see a common reality. And then the next really profound thing was I studied Islam as an undergraduate. And so if you read the Quran, it's totally impossible to buy into anti-Muslim propaganda and hysteria, because it's a complete distortion of a very beautiful religion, which basically is the same religion as Christianity and Judaism in its fundamental ethics. And finally, the last thing that happened is that I traveled with my then husband and my daughter Rosa when she was 2 throughout the Muslim world. And even though we were a Jewish family, and I have never been treated more warmly, welcomed more generously, taken into people's homes, treated like family.
Let me take you back in time now to, you were born in San Francisco, in California, at a time in the early 60s when, obviously growing up at that time as a child, it was starting to swing, basically. It was a pretty wild place. What do you recall of those early years?
Oh my goodness. Well, I was a child in the 60s, but I definitely grew up in utopia. I remember free stores where you could just go in and take a toy because, capitalism was dying, ostensibly. And I remember bongo drums on Hippie Hill in the park, and peace marches, and just a sense that, gay rights marches and women's rights marches, and very multi-ethnic, and very much of a sense that any group of citizens could unite and have a voice, and also a sense that you could really change the world. So it was a very happy place.
How was your relationship with your father, Leonard Wolf? He was a journalist and he's quite an outspoken man when he wants to be.
He is a big influence. I wrote a book about him. He is a big influence because he is a poet and a writer, so I saw that you could do that. It was the family business. It wasn't so mysterious. But also, he was definitely, as you say, a rabble-rouser. And decade after decade, he was in those marches, whatever they were for, and he was speaking up. And he also really believes in kind of following your path or following your dream, even if it's very unpopular at the time.
What of his characteristics are in you, do you think?
Well, I like to think that I respect the idea that everyone has a mission in life, no matter who they are. And I like to think that I think outside the box.
What about your mother?
Well, she's fabulous too. She is a therapist, and I would say that she's very, very, she's more focused on sort of kindness and nurturing. And I like to think I would like to believe I'm following in her path.
Were they put a lot of pressure on you anyway, or were you pretty much given free rein?
Oh, on the contrary, I probably did a lot of what I did because they put no pressure on me at all, in the sense that they were sort of very bohemian parents, and they just wanted everyone to sort of be happy and creative. And I think I rebelled by applying to Yale, and sort of being very, very focused.
How did that time, you went from Yale on to getting a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford, spent a few years in Britain. How do you think you changed from that experience to a very different kind of culture?
From the US to Britain? Well, that was a shock. That was definitely a shock.
So people think it's going to be similar, same language, but really similar.
I have to say that was my political awakening as an activist. You have to understand, in San Francisco, it was utopia. I never would have thought I needed to be a feminist because that had already been sorted out, And even at Yale, everything was quite progressive, and I never experienced anti-Semitism, I never experienced sexism. But then when I got to Oxford, I suddenly was in a rigidly hierarchical class society, deeply racist society. I mean, America has its racism, but this was, people weren't embarrassed about it, you know. And I experienced anti-Semitism, and it was a shock. And certainly the sexism at Oxford was so in your face. It definitely woke me up and made me feel like, wow, there's work to do.
Now, you got married and ended up divorced from that, but you have two children who obviously you nurture. What do you teach them about getting that balance right when it comes to gender, being aware of women's needs?
I'm not sure I teach them anything explicitly. I hope that they're learning by example. Their father is wonderful as well, and he teaches them wonderful things like respect for women, and he's very supportive of Rosa and Joey, you know, in their full kind of development as people. But I like to think that, well, both of them are seeing, you know, a working mom, and I believe that women work just as hard, if not harder, inside the home. But I hope they're seeing that I'm totally devoted to them. And what am I teaching them? I mean, you know, we're all, I think, this is really awkward because you know, it sounds so self-regarding, but I do try to do what I can to kind of make a difference. And I wouldn't say that that's explicit teaching about one agenda or another, but I think it's a very, you know, if I would like them to take away anything, it would be that. And they're very good people already. You know, I learn more from them probably than they do from me.
Naomi, more questions for you in a moment. We're going to take a short break and then more with Naomi Wolf when we return.